It's twilight time.
Wanda and Vision, aren't we a five-pair?
This is our home now. I want us to fit in.
Oh, this is gonna be a gas!
Well, f*** me. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I just finished watching the series finale of WandaVision and hot diggity dog, was it brilliant. I didn't have high hopes for this series. Not at all. After Endgame, even in the lead up to it, I'd kind of fallen out of love with the MCU. I was bored of the rinse and repeat format, the uninspired set designs, you know, grey walls, no artistic themes, lack of colour. I definitely could not say the same for this show. To the director Matt Shakman, I must say, bravo my man, bravo. What I love about this miniseries is that it dared to be different. This show is giving me hope for what Marvel Studios is capable of and what the future projects they have in store will hopefully deliver on. From the get-go, we get the most stylized addition to the Marvel Cinematic Universe I've ever seen. The old-timey aesthetic really lended itself well to establishing this story as being a drastic breakaway from the typical story format of the franchise. The episodic format for the story really allowed for an endearing look into the characters of Wanda Maximoff and the Vision that I don't think we've ever really got to see before. What I'm trying to get at is that the MCU movies, compared to this series, feel rushed. And to an extent, they have to be. A moviegoer wants to be entertained, enriched, and have a good time, but want it all wrapped up in time for dinner. Up to 3 hours for their cinematic releases is not a lot of time to really delve into their characters and allow their stories to breathe. Critique for the earlier parts of the season was that it was slow at getting to the point. Most people didn't know what was going on because they weren't fed the story on a silver platter from the outset. But, as so elegantly put by Mrs. Davis,
No, patients are, they're setting up their story. Let them tell it.
we can see their charm, their humanity, that they can actually be human. Make mistakes, have funny goofs. Obviously, the viewer knows that what we are seeing is wrong. Something is amiss. The Vision is meant to be dead. The show drips in little creepy hints that there is something much larger at play here. The awkward pauses as dialogue breaks the fourth wall, and the main characters not being quite sure what to do with that. It's you know, I don't feel comfortable, and that's the point. And they executed that really well. For example, the sword agent emerging from the sewers in a beekeeper costume being presented as something other, out of place, and being the monster in WandaVision's reality. This is perfectly in line with Wanda's vision, as they are alien to her created reality. One of the best early indicators of this is from the first episode, with Vision's boss and his wife over for dinner. As anyone would do making awkward table talk with people you don't really know, you start asking questions about how they met. You know, where do you come from? When did you get married? But Mr. Hart starts asking too many questions that Wanda doesn't want answered. He's starting to question Wanda's truth, what she has built up to be her actual life. And what does she do in response? She looks right at him, and then he begins to choke. I didn't even notice this until I rewatched it a second time. But she's acting in her character, but when enough is enough, her face drops, really stern, looks right at him, and then he chokes, and then she resumes character. Brilliant, very subtle acting there from Elizabeth Olsen, and now everything starts to become incredibly unsettled. The amplified diegetic sound of the ticking clock, the bewildered looks on Vision and Wanda's faces, and the repeated cheery line,
Stop it!
it's downright creepy and unsettling, and this kind of tension lends itself brilliantly to the style of storytelling the show employs. And as the series progressed, more and more information is supplied to the point of this fake television show being absent from the start of episode 4, so brilliantly titled, We Interrupt This Program. The visual style and the era progression are a very good example of how storytelling is done well in this format. As more and more information is revealed to the audience, the show itself and the setting catches up to the modern day, shattering that false reality that Wanda has created for herself. There are so many twists and turns that genuinely had me gripped. The comedic reveal that Agatha Harkness was the hidden bad guy was delivered so spot on. It really kept in step with the rest of the series' aesthetic. in that television format, and I'm glad it wasn't abandoned entirely. The show was knitted together so well, it was a cohesive story that had me gripped from start to finish. And this was also made possible by actual in-depth character development. Like I've already said, the Vision and Wanda have not truly been allowed to flourish under the MCU movies. For the Vision, we know that he is a thoroughbred hero. He does the right thing because it's in his programming. He's worthy of Mjolnir, and he even sacrifices his life in an attempt to stop Thanos from collecting the Infinity Stone. And for Wanda, we know that she has a chip on her shoulder. Her introduction is all about revenge, but then turns to good to save her home from the very thing she tried to help. And from there, all we know is that she is not in full control of her powers, that she loves the Vision, and is reluctant to do what is right for the greater good, however ultimately taking the heroic step. These films gave hints to Wanda's character, her loss, her understandable selfishness, but they were never truly explored. Enter WandaVision. Marvel could have gone the easy route, made Wanda the victim of the villainous Agatha Harkness, helplessly trapped in a prison designed to keep her entertained. But they didn't. They actually made Wanda the villain. I greatly appreciate that the creative team decided to borrow heavily from the House of M storyline. They finally acknowledged that Wanda is the most powerful being in the universe, and that she is only just manifesting the beginnings of her capability. But with so much power, she's still flawed. And they show this. This woman is stricken with grief, and I suppose, like the audience, she hasn't had a lot of time to process it all. Jumps from movie to movie, not really getting to deal with her grief. In her lifetime, she's lost her parents from a young age, she's lost her brother, and her lover. I mean, the latter two only happened in a 3-year span, and WandaVision finally explores the loss that Wanda feels. It was great to see that after giving birth, she remembered her brother, still emotionally affected.
His name was Pietro.
And then losing her love, her soulmate, it was all too much for her. Finding solace in childhood familiarity as a coping mechanism for the harshness of reality is something that is totally relatable. I mean, who doesn't seek out escapism as distraction from the real world? As people, as flawed people, we have a tendency to see an idealised projected version of ourselves onto these fictional characters. And that is exactly what Wanda does, but to a much more twisted extent, stealing the lives of hundreds, perhaps thousands of people to be puppets in a comfortable fantasy. I mean, with her sort of power...
Reality can be whatever I want.
I mean, sure, it was Agatha all along, manipulating Wanda into creating the fake Westview in attempts to harness her power. But it didn't take much manipulation. This was all what Wanda wanted. These were her desires, and the means to enact it was all her choosing. She was just nudged into that direction. She didn't have to listen to that voice, but she chose to.
It's all Wanda.
It's by acknowledging the villain that she has allowed herself to become that allows her inner hero to come out. Jordan B. Peterson put this point pretty well, so I'm going to let him explain this bit.
The first step to enlightenment is the encounter with the shadow. Everything horrible that human beings have done was done by human beings, and you're one of them. And so if you don't understand that, and to understand that really means to know how it was that you could have done it, and that's a shattering thing. To try to imagine that, to try to imagine yourself as someone who's engaged in medieval torture, to see how you could in fact do that. You're never the same after you learn that. But being never the same after learning that is unbelievably useful, because when you understand that that's what you're like, then you're a whole different creature. And I don't think, and this is something I did learn from Jung, is that you cannot be a good person until you know how much evil you contain within you. It is not possible.
She was only after understanding your capacity to be a monster does the ability for good emerge. But this lesson did not come cost-free. There are consequences for her actions. Her selfishness reaped only momentary reward. She ultimately chooses to give up all that she'd gained. The love of her family, her 2 boys, her husband. In a way, Wanda has now put her husband to death twice, which is not an easy thing to do. To die to yourself, sacrifice what you love, to enact the good, becoming the master of the fire, becoming the Scarlet Witch. Not only that, but her consequences will be long felt. all is not forgiven. We are shown how damaging she's been with her powers to her prisoners, and they don't forgive her after attempted reconciliation. In their eyes, she is no hero. They are weary of the Scarlet Witch, a name that may haunt them for all their days. This is what WandaVision got right, where Wonder Woman 1984 failed. There are no consequences for her selfishness in that movie, for holding a man's body captive to have her boyfriend back. I mean, come on, she literally slept with this guy against his will. The man just brushed it off, not having any recollection of his missing time. But these people of Westview, they remember, and they will not forget what the Scarlet Witch did to them. And that speaks volumes to the credit that should be given to the storytellers of this title. Finally doing justice to the character of Wanda Maximoff, this twisted, flawed person with power that she can't control. They stayed true to the source material, and they did terrific fan service. Now this is the part of the video where I'll stop being up myself and just get to geek out at all the amazing comic booky goodness smeared onto this show. They finally gave her a name.
The Scarlet Witch.
There it is!
And they also gave her a costume. Very good interpretation. They really teased us all season for it, but I'm glad we got the payoff.
You naughty, naughty. You teasing me, you naughty, naughty.
Speaking of costumes, showing off the classic ones for both the young kids and the adults, brilliant. They actually addressed her power level. The stone wasn't the one that gave her the powers, they just awakened what was already in her. Implication being, she's a mutant? Is her brother a mutant too? Who knows, time will tell. Speaking of Quicksilver, hilarious. I genuinely laughed at his introduction into the show. I mean, the sheer audacity of the multiple layers of references there is just astounding. The White Vision. The White Vision! I can't believe it. They actually went there. He looked sick. They left the Vision's return open. Maybe it will come back. Hopefully this time with a popped collar. Stop teasing me. Tommy and Billy, the twins. Well casted, great introduction. Loved that their clothes were homages to their costumes from the comics. Agatha Harkness, brilliantly, absolutely superbly executed. I was completely blindsided. Photon, odd place for her to be introduced into the MCU, but I'm not mad at it. I like the character. I liked Jimmy and Darcy. It was great. They were funny, made the show feel connected to the MCU, which is usually a gripe of mine. But because the story was allowed to breathe, the connectivity and the setups for future projects didn't feel as forced down my throat as normal. Which to me displays the brilliance of WandaVision, a Marvel project where a lot of creative control was given to the director, which allowed him to experiment with a different style of storytelling that was so refreshing. A story that was given the time to breathe, develop, and have a satisfying ending. One full of genuine character development that invited a nuanced insight into a troubled hero. A story full of fan service that was integrated brilliantly into the world without feeling forced. I really feel that an episodic format benefits Marvel's characters extremely well, more so than some of their movies. I'm definitely excited for the future projects now, like Winter Soldier and Falcon and Loki. It's going to be interesting what they do. Because if Marvel Studios continues down this path, it will only benefit them. And if WandaVision is any indication, I certainly believe that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has a bright future.
I've always been alone, so I don't feel the lack. It's all I've ever known. I've never experienced loss because I've never had a loved one to lose. But what is grief, if not love persevering?